The first time Elena Marchetti walked into Salvetti Tower, the security guard looked at her like she was delivering a package, not like she was the woman who had been personally summoned by Dante Salvetti himself. She was used to that look, the quick flick of eyes down her body, the slight curl of a lip, the immediate dismissal. At 34, Elena had built a career on being underestimated. She had trained opera singers who went on to perform at La Scala, coached politicians through debate seasons that made or broke their campaigns, and helped actors find the emotional truth in their voices when their careers depended on it. But none of that mattered to people who saw her curves before they saw her credentials. She adjusted the strap of her leather satchel, heavy with audio equipment and notebooks, and walked toward the elevator with her chin high. The lobby was all black marble and gold accents, the kind of wealth that whispered instead of shouted. Men in suits moved with purpose, their eyes scanning, their shoulders squared. Elena felt their gazes slide over her like water over stone. She was invisible to them. That was fine. She had learned long ago that invisibility was its own kind of power. The elevator doors opened on the 42nd floor, and a young woman with a tight ponytail and a headset greeted her with a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Miss Marchetti, Mr. Salvetti is expecting you. Please follow me." Elena followed, her low heels silent on the thick carpet. The hallway smelled of leather and something floral, expensive and subtle. They passed glass-walled offices where people typed and talked and gestured, and then they reached a set of double doors at the end of the corridor. The assistant knocked once, then opened the door. "Mr. Salvetti, your voice coach is here." The office was vast. Floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, the afternoon light turning everything golden. A massive desk sat near the windows, but Dante Salvetti wasn't behind it. He was standing by a bookshelf, his back to the door, his shoulders broad under a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. When he turned, Elena felt the air change. He was not handsome in the way of magazine covers. His face was too hard for that, the jaw too sharp, the eyes too dark and watchful. He looked like a man who had seen things and done things, and would never be entirely clean of them. But there was something in the way he held himself, a coiled tension that spoke of control so absolute it bordered on exhaustion. "Miss Marchetti," his voice was low, roughened at the edges. "Thank you for coming." Before Elena could respond, another voice cut through the room. "This is the voice coach? You've got to be kidding me." Elena turned. A man had been standing near the window, half hidden by the glare. He was tall and lean, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Elena's monthly rent, his hair slicked back in a way that was meant to look effortless, but screamed of product and mirrors. His eyes traveled over Elena's body with undisguised contempt. "She looks like she should be teaching theater kids how to project in a high school auditorium, not preparing you for a national press conference." The words landed like a slap. Elena felt her face heat, but she didn't flinch. She had been called worse by better men. Dante's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "That's enough, Marcus." Marcus apparently was not deterred. "I'm serious, Dante. This is your publicist speaking. Your image is everything right now. The board is nervous. The press is circling. And you bring in some woman who looks like she's never met a carb she didn't like. We need someone who commands respect, not someone who looks like she needs a chair reinforced." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Elena felt her heart hammering against her ribs, but she forced herself to breathe slowly, to keep her face calm. She had learned that reacting to cruelty only fed it. Instead, she looked at Dante. His jaw was tight, a muscle ticking in his cheek. He didn't look at Marcus. He looked at Elena. "Miss Marchetti comes highly recommended. Her work with Senator Calloway's re-election campaign was instrumental. She understands vocal stress, breathing patterns, and emotional cadence better than anyone in the country. That's why she's here. Marcus snorted. Senator Calloway. Great. A politician. This is different, Dante. You're not asking for votes. You're addressing the entire country about allegations that could destroy everything we've built. You need someone who understands optics, not just acoustics. Elena spoke for the first time since entering the room. Her voice was steady, clear, the product of years of training. Optics are about perception. Sound is about truth. People will believe what they hear long before they believe what they see. If your boss's voice doesn't carry conviction, no amount of image control will save him. Marcus turned to her, his lip curling. Did I ask you? No, Elena said calmly. But your boss did. So here I am. Dante made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. He moved toward his desk, gesturing for Elena to sit. Marcus, we'll continue this later. For now, I need to work with Miss Marchetti. Alone. Marcus's face flushed with anger. But he didn't argue. He shot Elena a look of pure venom and strode out of the office, the door closing behind him with a decisive click. Elena let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. I apologize for him, Dante said, settling into the chair behind his desk. He's good at his job, but his people skills leave something to be desired. That's one way to put it, Elena said. She sat in the chair across from him, her satchel in her lap. Another way would be that he's a misogynistic bully who uses cruelty as a management style. Dante's mouth twitched. That too. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Elena was used to assessing people quickly. Their posture, their breathing, the tension in their shoulders, the way they held their jaw. Dante Salvetti was a fortress. Every part of him was guarded, controlled, deliberate. But underneath that, she could hear it in his voice. Exhaustion, grief, something that had been broken and poorly mended. Tell me about the press conference, she said. What are you preparing for? Dante leaned back in his chair, his eyes going distant. 3 weeks ago, a former associate of mine was arrested. He's been talking to federal prosecutors, trying to make a deal. He's made allegations about my organization, about me personally. None of it is true, but the media has been running with it. The board of my legitimate businesses is nervous. Investors are pulling out. I need to make a public statement to address the allegations and reassure the people who depend on me for their livelihoods. And you've never done a public statement before, Elena said. It wasn't a question. No, I've always operated behind the scenes. My lawyers speak for me. My representatives handle the press. But this time, it has to be me. People need to see my face and hear my voice. They need to believe me. Elena nodded slowly. She had worked with clients like this before. Powerful people who had spent their lives hiding their true selves, who had built walls so high they'd forgotten what it felt like to be seen. Teaching them to speak publicly wasn't just about breath control and pacing. It was about teaching them to be human in front of an audience. All right, she said. Let's start with something simple. I want you to read something for me. Anything. A passage from a book, a poem, a news article. I need to hear your natural speaking voice before we start working on technique. Dante hesitated. Then he reached for a leather-bound book on his desk, opened it to a random page, and began to read. His voice was low and rough, the words coming slowly at first, then gaining rhythm. He read about markets and trade routes, something dry and technical, but Elena wasn't listening to the words. She was listening to the voice beneath them, the places where his breath caught, the slight tremor on certain vowels, the way his pitch dropped when he reached the end of a sentence. He was afraid, not of public speaking, not of humiliation. He was afraid of being heard, of being truly known. When he finished, he looked up at her, and for just a moment, the mask slipped. She saw the man underneath, tired, wary, hoping for something he couldn't name. "Well?" he asked. Elena smiled. "We have work to do." Over the next week, Elena met with Dante every day. They worked in his office, in a small conference room, once even on the rooftop garden, where the wind made recording impossible, but the openness seemed to help him breathe. She taught him about diaphragmatic breathing, about pacing and pauses, about the way emotion could be channeled through the voice without overwhelming it. She recorded him reading speeches, played them back, pointed out the places where his tension bled through. But more than that, she talked to him. She asked about his childhood, his family, the things that mattered to him. At first, he resisted. His answers were clipped, guarded, the responses of a man who had learned that vulnerability was a weakness to be exploited. But Elena was patient. She didn't push. She just kept asking, kept listening, kept creating a space where he could speak without armor. And slowly, gradually, he began to open up. He told her about his father, a brutal man who had built the Salvetti empire on fear and violence. He told her about his mother, who had died when he was 12, leaving him alone in a world of men who saw emotion as a liability. He told her about the weight of legacy, the constant pressure to be harder, colder, more ruthless than anyone around him. "I've spent my whole life learning how not to feel," he said one evening, as the sun set over the city and painted the office in shades of orange and gold. "And now, you're telling me I have to feel everything, in front of millions of people. I'm telling you that feeling is not weakness," Elena said. "It's connection. People don't trust perfection. They trust humanity. If you want them to believe you, you have to let them see you. Not the boss, not the legend. You." Dante was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, very softly, "No one has ever asked me to do that before." Elena felt something shift in her chest, a tenderness she hadn't expected. She had worked with many clients over the years, but none of them had ever looked at her the way Dante Salvetti was looking at her now, like she was a door he hadn't known existed, and he was terrified to walk through it. They continued working. The press conference was scheduled for Friday, and by Wednesday, Dante's delivery had transformed. He still had the roughness, the edge that made him who he was, but now there was warmth underneath it, a current of genuine emotion that made his words land with weight and truth. Elena was proud of him. She was also, she realized with some alarm, beginning to care about him in ways that went beyond professional concern. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, which was rare but devastating. She noticed the way he listened to her, really listened, like her words mattered more than anyone else's in the world. She noticed the way he looked at her body, not with the contempt Marcus had shown, but with something else entirely. Appreciation, heat, a hunger that he was clearly trying to control. It would be a complication. Elena knew that. But knowing it and preventing it were two different things. On Thursday morning, everything fell apart. Elena was at her apartment, reviewing the final draft of Dante's speech, when her phone buzzed with a news alert. She glanced at it, and her blood went cold. Audio leak. Mafia boss Dante Salvetti confesses to criminal conspiracy in shocking recording. Her hands trembling, she opened the link. The audio was poor quality, recorded in what sounded like a large room with bad acoustics. But the voice was unmistakably Dante's. The same low roughness, the same cadence, the same slight accent that colored certain words. He was confessing, admitting to bribery, extortion, money laundering, detailing crimes with a casualness that made Elena's stomach turn. "This is not him," she whispered to the empty room. "This is not him." She listened again, and again, and on the fourth listen, she heard it. It was subtle, so subtle that no one without her training would have caught it. But Elena had spent years studying the human voice, learning its infinite variations and vulnerabilities. She knew how breath moved through the body, how stress tightened the vocal cords, how emotion shaped sound in ways that couldn't be faked. And this recording, for all its surface accuracy, was wrong. The breathing pattern was off. Dante had a distinctive way of pausing mid-sentence, a slight catch in his breath that came from years of tension held in his diaphragm. This voice didn't have it. The emotional cadence was flat. Dante's voice, even at its most controlled, carried an undercurrent of feeling, grief, anger, longing. This voice was hollow, a perfect imitation with nothing underneath. And the accent. Dante's accent shifted subtly, depending on his emotional state, becoming more pronounced when he was angry, softening when he was calm. This voice maintained a consistent accent throughout, never wavering, never shifting. It was a digital manipulation, a very, very good one, but a manipulation nonetheless. Elena grabbed her satchel and ran. The Salvetti Tower was in chaos when she arrived. Reporters crowded the sidewalk. Cameras pointed at the building like weapons. Security guards formed a human barricade at the entrance. Elena pushed through the crowd, her heart pounding, and flashed her building pass at the guard, who had dismissed her just a week ago. He recognized her now. "Miss Marchetti, go on up. Mr. Salvetti is in the conference room." The conference room was filled with people when she burst in. Dante sat at the head of the table, his face gray with exhaustion. Marcus stood beside him, gesturing wildly, his voice raised in what sounded like a rehearsed panic. Around the table, men in suits argued and pointed at screens and shouted into phones. Everyone stopped when Elena entered. "Miss Marchetti," Dante said, rising from his chair, "you shouldn't be here. It's not safe. The press is—" "It's fake," Elena said. "The recording. It's been digitally manipulated." The room went silent. Marcus's face twisted. "What are you talking about? Of course it's real. It's his voice. We all heard it." "You heard it," she said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. "But you didn't listen. There's a difference." She walked to the conference table and pulled out her laptop, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "I need a sound engineer, someone who can isolate vocal patterns and compare waveforms. Is there anyone in the building who can do that?" A young man near the back of the room raised his hand hesitantly. "I'm in IT. I've done some audio work. My name is Theo." "Theo," Elena said. "Come here. I need your help." For the next hour, Elena and Theo worked side by side, their heads bent over the laptop screen. Theo was quiet and competent, his fingers quick on the keyboard, his questions sharp and relevant. He pulled the leaked audio file from a news site and ran it through a series of analysis programs, while Elena explained what she was looking for.
"The breathing pattern," she said, pointing at the waveform on the screen.
"See here? This is a natural breath. It has a slight irregularity, a micro-pause where the diaphragm resets. But in the leaked audio, the breaths are too even. They're synthetic. Someone generated them digitally." Theo nodded, his eyes wide. "And the emotional markers? Here." Elena highlighted a section of the waveform. When someone is confessing to crimes, their voice carries stress indicators, increased pitch variability, micro-tremors, changes in pace. This voice has none of that. It's emotionally flat. It sounds like Dante, but it doesn't feel like him. Theo ran another analysis, comparing the leaked audio to the recordings Elena had made during their coaching sessions. The results were damning. "The vocal patterns don't match," Theo said, his voice rising with excitement. "The pitch, the timbre, the resonance, they're close, but not identical. This is a deep fake, a really sophisticated one, but a deep fake. Someone used AI to generate a synthetic version of Mr. Salvetti's voice. Dante, who had been watching silently from the head of the table, stood up slowly. His face was unreadable, but his eyes burned with a cold fury that made the room feel 10 degrees colder. "Who did this?" he asked. His voice was quiet, but it carried more menace than any shout. Elena looked at the waveform on her screen, then at Marcus, who had gone very pale. The publicist was backing toward the door, his earlier bluster completely gone. "Marcus?" Dante said. His voice was still quiet, still controlled, but there was something in it now that made the other men in the room shrink back. Something ancient and predatory. "I didn't," Marcus started. "I would never—" "Theo," Dante said, not taking his eyes off Marcus. "Can you trace the origin of the fake audio?" Theo's fingers flew over the keyboard. "The metadata's been scrubbed, but there are digital fingerprints. Give me a few minutes." "You don't have a few minutes," Marcus snapped, his voice cracking. "We need to do damage control now. We need to issue a denial. Get ahead of this. We need the truth," Dante said. "Sit down, Marcus." Marcus didn't sit. He took another step toward the door, and suddenly 2 of Dante's men were there, blocking his path. Their faces were expressionless, their hands resting lightly at their sides. But their message was clear. "I got it," Theo said. The audio file was created on a computer, registered to Marcus Webb. There's also email correspondence with a known digital forger, discussing payment for a voice synthesis project. And, he paused, his eyes widening, there are messages to someone named Victor Kozlov, offering to sell crisis management services after the confession destroys Mr. Salvetti's reputation. Victor Kozlov. The name hung in the air like a death sentence. Elena didn't know who Kozlov was, but she could see from the faces around the table that he was someone very, very dangerous. Marcus's face had gone from pale to gray. His hands were shaking. "Dante, please, I can explain." Dante walked toward him slowly, each step deliberate, measured. The room was so silent Elena could hear her own heartbeat. "You were going to destroy me," Dante said. "Not just my reputation, my life. You were going to sell the solution to my enemies and profit from my ruin." "It wasn't personal," Marcus whispered. "It was business." Dante stopped inches from Marcus's face. For a long moment, he just looked at him. Then he said, very softly, "Get him out of here." The men at the door moved. Marcus was dragged from the room, his protests fading down the hallway. The other men at the table exchanged glances, then began gathering their things and slipping out, until only Dante, Elena, and Theo remained. Dante turned to Elena. His face was still hard, still controlled, but his eyes were different now, softer. "You saved me," he said. "If you hadn't heard what no one else could hear, I would be finished." Elena shook her head. "I just did my job." "No." Dante stepped closer. "You did more than your job. You believed in me when everyone else was ready to believe the worst. You heard the truth when everyone else heard a lie." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm and strong, and Elena felt something electric pass between them. "The press conference is tomorrow," he said. "I want you there, not just as my coach. I want you to present the evidence. I want the world to see the woman who saved me." Elena's heart was pounding. "Dante, I'm not a public figure. I'm a voice coach. I work behind the scenes." "Not anymore," he said. His thumb traced a slow circle on the back of her hand. "You've been invisible long enough. It's time for people to see you. The way I see you." The press conference was held in the grand ballroom of the Hotel Astoria, a glittering space of crystal chandeliers and gilded moldings that had hosted presidents and celebrities, and now, apparently, a mafia boss fighting for his life. The room was packed with reporters, cameras, microphones, the air thick with anticipation, and the hum of whispered speculation. Elena stood backstage, her heart hammering so hard she could feel it in her throat. She was wearing a deep blue dress that hugged her curves, chosen by a stylist Dante had insisted on hiring. For the first time in her professional life, she wasn't trying to be invisible, she was trying to be seen. Theo stood beside her, clutching a laptop and looking slightly green. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," Elena said, "but I'm doing it anyway." Dante appeared at her elbow, resplendent in a black suit that made him look like a king about to address his subjects. His face was calm, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the slight clench of his jaw. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for everything." Before she could respond, he walked onto the stage. The cameras flashed. The room fell silent. Dante stepped up to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and began to speak. His voice was everything Elena had taught him to be: steady, warm, resonant with genuine emotion. He spoke about the allegations, about the fake confession, about the betrayal of someone he had trusted. He spoke about the importance of truth and the courage it took to stand up and be heard. And then he introduced Elena. "This woman," he said, gesturing for her to join him on stage, "is the reason I am standing here today." She heard what no one else could hear. She found the truth when everyone else was ready to believe a lie. She is not just my voice coach. She is my savior. Elena walked onto the stage, her heels clicking on the polished floor, her heart in her throat. The lights were blinding. The cameras were everywhere. She could feel hundreds of eyes on her body, assessing, judging, dismissing. But then, she looked at Dante, and she saw the way he was looking at her, with pride, with gratitude, with something deeper that made her breath catch. She stepped up to the podium. She plugged in Theo's laptop, and she began to speak. Her voice was clear and strong, the voice of a woman who had spent her life studying sound, and now finally had something to say. She explained vocal stress patterns, breathing habits, accent shifts, emotional cadence. She played the real recordings of Dante's voice, then the fake confession, and pointed out the differences on the waveform display. She showed the digital fingerprints that traced the forgery back to Marcus Webb. She laid out the evidence, piece by piece, until there was no doubt left. The room was silent when she finished. Then, slowly, the silence broke. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras flashed. The story was no longer about a mafia boss's confession. It was about a brilliant woman who had uncovered a conspiracy, and the man who had been saved by her genius. Dante stepped forward and took her hand. His grip was warm and steady, and when he looked at her, she saw something in his eyes that made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. "You did it," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "I did my job," she said. "No." He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "You did so much more." In the days that followed, the story dominated the news cycle. Marcus Webb was arrested and charged with fraud, conspiracy, and a dozen other crimes. Viktor Kozlov, the rival who had been poised to buy the crisis solution, was implicated in the plot and faced his own legal troubles. Dante Salvetti's reputation not only survived, it flourished. People saw him not as a criminal, but as a man who had been targeted by enemies and had fought back with truth and dignity. And Elena Marchetti became a household name. She was offered book deals, speaking engagements, consulting contracts with Fortune 500 companies, but she turned most of them down. She wasn't interested in fame. She was interested in the work. And she was interested, more than she wanted to admit, in Dante Salvetti. He called her every day. At first, it was about business, follow-up interviews, legal strategy, public relations. But gradually, the calls became longer, more personal. He asked about her day, her thoughts, her dreams. He told her about his own, the things he had never told anyone, the fears and hopes he had buried under years of armor. One evening, 3 weeks after the press conference, he invited her to dinner. Not at a restaurant, but at his home, a penthouse apartment overlooking the city, all clean lines and warm lighting, and windows that made you feel like you were floating among the stars. He cooked for her himself, a simple pasta dish that he admitted was the only thing he knew how to make. They ate on the terrace, the city spread out below them like a carpet of lights, and talked until the stars came out. "I've spent my whole life building walls," Dante said, his voice soft in the darkness. "I thought they would protect me, but they only isolated me. You taught me how to take them down." "You didn't need me for that," Elena said. "You just needed permission." He reached across the table and took her hand. His touch was gentle, almost reverent. "I needed you," he said. "I still need you. Not as a coach, not as a consultant, as—" He trailed off, struggling for words. Elena understood. She had spent her life listening to the things people couldn't say, hearing the emotions beneath the words. She heard what Dante was trying to tell her now, that she had become essential to him, that her presence in his life had changed something fundamental, that he was terrified of losing her, and even more terrified of asking her to stay. "I'm here," she said simply. He looked at her, his dark eyes reflecting the city lights. "For how long?" "As long as you want me." He stood and pulled her to her feet. His hands settled on her waist, warm and solid, and she felt the heat of him through the thin fabric of her dress. "I want you forever," he said. The words were rough, almost broken, as if they had been torn out of him against his will. But he didn't take them back. He just stood there, holding her, waiting for her response. Elena reached up and touched his face. She traced the hard line of his jaw, the slight roughness of stubble, the soft skin at the corner of his eye. She saw the man beneath the boss, the boy who had lost his mother, the young man who had been forced to become a monster, the weary soul who had never been allowed to rest. "Okay," she said. "Forever it is." He kissed her then, and it was nothing like she had expected. She had thought he would be rough, demanding, the way he was in business. But his kiss was gentle, almost tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. His hands moved over her curves with something like wonder, tracing the shape of her hips, her waist, her breasts, as if he couldn't believe she was real. "You're beautiful," he murmured against her lips. "Every part of you." Elena felt tears prick at her eyes. She had spent so many years being told that her body was wrong, that she was too much, that she needed to be smaller, quieter, less visible. And here was this man, this powerful, dangerous, complicated man, telling her that she was beautiful, not despite her curves. Because of them. They made love that night in his bedroom, with the city lights painting shadows on the walls. He was careful with her at first, almost worshipful, his hands and mouth exploring every inch of her body. But she pulled him closer, urged him on, showed him that she wasn't fragile, that she wanted all of him. The passion, the intensity, the hunger he had been holding back. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the sheets, her head on his chest, his hand stroking her hair. "I love you," he said. The words were quiet, almost shy, as if he had never said them before, and wasn't sure he was doing it right. Elena smiled against his skin. "I know," she said. "I heard it in your voice." He laughed, a real laugh, warm and surprised. "Of course you did. You hear everything." "Not everything," she said, "but I hear you. And that's enough." In the months that followed, Elena's life transformed in ways she had never imagined. She continued her work as a voice coach, but now her client list included some of the most powerful people in the world, people who had seen her on that stage and recognized the value of her expertise. She opened her own studio, hired a team of analysts and coaches, and built a reputation as the foremost expert in vocal forensics and communication strategy. But the most important transformation was the one that happened in private. Dante Salvetti, the man who had spent his life hiding behind walls of silence and violence, learned how to speak. Not just in public, but in the quiet moments that mattered most. He learned to say, "I'm scared," and "I'm sorry," and "I need you." He learned to laugh without restraint and cry without shame. He learned that vulnerability was not weakness, but the foundation of real strength. And Elena learned something too. She learned that being seen was not the same as being exposed, that her body was not a liability, but a gift, that the right person would look at her curves and see not excess, but abundance, a richness of flesh and spirit that deserved to be celebrated, not hidden. One evening, 6 months after the press conference, they sat together on the terrace of his penthouse, watching the sun set over the city. Dante's arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest. "I have something for you," he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Elena's heart stopped. "Dante," she whispered. He opened the box. Inside was a ring, a simple band of platinum with a single diamond, elegant and understated. It was not the ring of a mafia boss trying to show off his wealth. It was the ring of a man who knew the woman he loved. "I'm not good at speeches," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You know that better than anyone. But I've been practicing." He took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice was steady and true. "Elena Marchetti, you taught me how to speak. You taught me how to be heard. But more than that, you taught me how to listen. To myself, to my heart. And what my heart is telling me now is that I don't want to spend another day without you by my side. Will you marry me?" Elena looked at the ring, then at the man holding it. She saw the fear in his eyes, the fear of rejection, of vulnerability, of hoping for something and having it taken away. And she heard, beneath his words, the truth that he was still learning to express, that she had become his home, his safe place, the only person in the world who truly knew him. "Yes," she said. Her voice was clear and strong, the voice of a woman who had finally found her place in the world. "Yes, I will marry you." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and the city lights blurred around them, and for a moment, there was nothing in the world but the two of them. The wedding was small and private, held in a garden outside the city, with only their closest friends in attendance. Theo was there, beaming with pride, having become not just a colleague, but a true friend. Elena's mother cried through the entire ceremony. Dante's men, hardened criminals who had seen things that would break most people, stood in the back with tears in their eyes. And when Elena walked down the aisle in a dress that celebrated every curve of her body, Dante looked at her like she was the sun and the moon and all the stars in the sky. They wrote their own vows. Dante went first, his voice rough but steady. "I spent my life believing that love was a weakness, that caring for someone meant giving them a weapon to use against you. But you showed me that love is the only strength that matters. You saw me when I was invisible to myself. You heard me when I had forgotten how to speak. You loved me when I didn't know how to be loved. I promised to spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you." Elena's vows were simpler, but no less heartfelt. "I've spent my life listening," she said, "to voices, to breaths, to the things people say without words. And what I hear in you, Dante Salvetti, is the sound of a good man, a man who has been hurt and has hurt others, but who wants to be better, a man who is learning, every day, how to love without armor. I promise to keep listening, to keep hearing you, to keep loving you, exactly as you are." They kissed, and the garden erupted in applause, and somewhere in the distance, a bird sang a song that sounded like hope. Years later, when people asked Elena how she had ended up married to one of the most powerful men in the country, she would smile and say, "I listened." And when they asked Dante how he had managed to escape the darkness of his past and build a life of legitimacy and love, he would say, "She taught me how to speak." But the truth was more complicated than that. The truth was that two broken people had found each other in a world of noise and lies and had learned, together, how to make something beautiful. The truth was that a curvy voice coach who had been mocked and dismissed had saved a mafia boss, not just from his enemies, but from himself. And the truth was that love, real love, was not about rescuing or being rescued. It was about seeing someone clearly, hearing them truly, and choosing them anyway, every day, for the rest of your life. Elena Marchetti Salvetti sat on the terrace of the penthouse she shared with her husband, watching the sun set over the city she had come to love. Her laptop was open beside her, a new speech draft waiting for her review. Her phone buzzed with messages from clients and colleagues and friends, and inside, she could hear Dante moving around the kitchen, humming off-key, completely unself-conscious, in a way he never would have been before she taught him that his voice was worth hearing. She smiled and closed her eyes, letting the sounds of her life wash over her. The city, the wind, the man she loved. She had spent her whole life listening, and finally, she had found something worth hearing.